Hello, Rebels. Welcome to the Daily California, Friday, May the 6th. We have got such a lot to get to today. Katy Grimes is going to be joining us from California Globe. She's got an amazing story, a very important story, real accountability. Following up, do you remember that incredible pledge that Gavin Newsom made about that fantastic contract he had back at the start of the pandemic to get masks from China and all this money? Whatever happened to all of that? We'll find out later today. And there's some other stories we're just going to, just squeeze in. There's so much going on. There's the latest from Gascon down in LA, what's been going on there. Just more examples of the complete madness that he's imposing on our great city of Los Angeles. If we have time, the latest shenanigans from the Democrats on the gas tax rebate, which is completely falling apart. But I want to start with where we've been all week, really, which is this incredible, reckless, inflammatory rhetoric we're seeing from the Democrats on the abortion issue after that draft ruling that was leaked on Monday. And day after day, we've seen it time and again. Democrats across the country, particularly here in California, they're kind of seizing onto this as some kind of lifeline to try and save themselves and get political advantage in the elections this year, because they know that if they actually were accountable, if the elections were about what they have done, about their actual governance, about their actual record, about what is going on in the state of California, they have no argument to make, because it's been a disaster all round. So they're clutching at this issue and, of course, using it to try and rile up their base and get turnout going. And here's another example. Okay, Lanhee Chen running for state controller. Great guy. You've met him. He has been on the show this week, many times before. He's just a really strong candidate, endorsed, if you remember, by the LA Times for state controller. Here's his opponent. Guess what she wants to make the race about? This is Democrat candidate Malia Cohen. She's called upon him, this is the quote, to come clean to California voters about his position on a woman's right to choose and our state's efforts to codify this freedom for California women. Well, what's that got to do with the job that they are both running for, which is to basically be the auditor for federal programs across California? All the things that are going wrong, the waste and the incompetence, and there's so many examples. Yet she's talking about this issue. That's what she wants to make the race about. What does that tell you about what they've actually done and their record? And of course, Lanhee hit back quite rightly. I just want to read you what he said. He's slamming his opponent's flailing campaigns. Fair enough. That's kind of part of the course from a candidate. But here's the substance of it. He's completely right. The last things my opponents want to talk about are the $20 billion in unemployment benefits sent to convicted felons and fraudsters, the billions spent each year on homelessness with dismal results, the billions in shady no-bid contracts doled out to their political donors, get to that later with Katy, and the innumerable other examples of failed fiscal leadership in California. Of course, he's right. That's what this election for that particular position, state controller, should be about. But here we are with this Democrat Malia Cohen wanting to make it all about abortion. What does that reveal about their actual record? It is so disgusting to see this happen, and I'm afraid we're going to see a lot more of it. Because there's nothing else that they won't talk about anything else. They're obsessed about this abortion issue because they see it as a lifeline. We're heading for disaster now. Finally, here's something we can cling on to. And in the process, they are demagoguing and dividing and creating this kind of all this fear mongering about what's going to happen next. You saw it with Gavin Newsom yesterday about they're coming for you next gay match. It's so disgusting, because they don't want to talk about their governance. And here's another example. I just saw this story today, and I really want to give you the details, because so often we don't get the chance to talk about the details. Just one example. Lanhee Chen, in this statement, where they're talking about the examples of failed fiscal leadership in California and the disasters of governance. Remember high-speed rail? High-speed rail, that was this giant project. Let's just review. There's a really interesting story about it today I was reading, just going through the details of how this is another thing that's completely falling apart because they haven't got a clue. Let's just remind ourselves the history of this project. It was in 2008. It was approved in a ballot measure. They said it would be $9 billion. $9 billion. That's the money that was approved. They said the total cost would be $33 billion, and it would start running by 2020, 2 years ago. The latest estimate, so going from 33 billion, latest estimate was 105 billion. So that's trebled, right? By by the way, that price tag was made in 2019, so 3 years ago. Doesn't account for all the inflation since then, as it says, in construction materials and labor. The Legislative Analysts Office, the nonpartisan group, estimates all this stuff in Sacramento. They're saying it's going to be a lot more even than that because of inflation since then. They don't even know the real cost. And then after this sort of great promise that it would connect, Los Angeles to San Francisco and everyone will be connected on high-speed rail, it will all be amazing. Then they announced a sort of totally scaled-back project in 2019. Here's Gavin Newsom sort of explain, and even this has fallen apart. But let's just watch what he said about this high-speed rail project. This is from February the 12th, 2019.
Let's level about the high-speed rail. But let's be real. The current project, as planned, would cost too much and respectfully take too long. There's been too little oversight and not enough transparency. Right now, there simply isn't a path to get from Sacramento to San Diego, let alone from San Francisco to LA. I wish there were. However, we do have the capacity to complete a high-speed rail link between Merced and Bakersfield. We'll continue to support our regional projects north and south. We'll finish phase 1 of the environmental work. We'll connect the revitalized Central Valley to other parts of the state, and we will continue to push forward for more federal funding and private dollars. But let's get something done once and for all.
Let's get something done. Well, they couldn't even do that. We have the capacity to do this. No, you don't, because you're all clueless. You have no idea how to actually make anything work in government. You haven't got a clue. That was just 2019. That was the revised project, the scaled down project. Let's look at what's happened. So this is a 119-mile stretch of Central Valley construction, supposed to be completed they got a new deadline. They set a deadline 2023, likely won't be finished until 2026 at the earliest, right? 57% of these utility relocation projects are uncompleted. 10 years after construction began, they lack hundreds of land parcels out of what they actually need to build this. Only 28 of the 66 structures across 4 counties now, we're talking about just 4 counties, have been completed. He's saying, let's be real, we can get this done. Oh my gosh. And then there's another, this is even better. Right? Now they're saying to sort of do the original vision and to connect, they got the sort of Central Valley bit. Then they want to add the spurs, to connect up. So San Francisco to Bakersfield, it's currently ending at Bakersfield if they ever get there, to Los Angeles. They price that as another $50 billion. And then San Francisco to the Central Valley is another $22 billion. It just goes up and up. And here's the best bit, right? After all that, right, because of the way they're handling it, they haven't got time to install the actual high voltage electricity system that makes it high speed. So what they're now talking about, it says in the interim, it wants the rail authority to consider a new generation of battery-operated trains. It's just kind of and now the people involved saying that the battery trains wouldn't actually travel fast enough to comply with their own legal requirements. It's just a complete farce. No wonder they want to talk about abortion. Katy Grimes, great to see you from the California Globe. You've got a blockbuster story yourself that we're going to get to. But what do you make of this and how they're sort of, trying to distract from their failures with this abortion argument?
Oh, absolutely. It's the only issue that they can sell to the public right now. They have failed, especially in California, on absolutely every other important issue right now. Our energy, the wildfires, the water shortages, the crime, the homelessness. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. It's a very long list of issues that they have done nothing to improve. And so what else are they going to talk about but abortion?
I know. I mean, this trade thing, it's almost, I mean, it's funny because it's so ludicrous. But these are the people who also, they constantly, do you remember the Trump administration? They constantly, and then when Biden took over, Democrats generally here in California, they're going on about, well, we've got the adults back in charge. We really know how to run things after the chaos of the Trump. I mean, they genuinely haven't got a clue. I mean, I talked about this yesterday because there's a story again. This high-speed rail is a big story. This is the biggest infrastructure project in the state's history. completely going off the rails, pun intended. But yesterday I talked about a very small story, as it were, which was the fact that you've got all these affordable housing units standing empty in San Francisco, even as you've got thousands and thousands of families applying for them. But it's all the same thing, which is they actually really don't know how to make things work in government. What they do, what this generation of Democrats seems to be all about is sort of ideology signaling. It's just kind of sending out the right message as far as they're concerned on Twitter and all the rest of it to pander to their activists.
Absolutely. And it does go back to the high-speed rail issue as well, which, as you point out, is the largest infrastructure project we've ever, or the most expensive, I'll say. I think the California Aqueduct was a beautiful example of something we needed that was well done.
Yes.
But now with high-speed rail, A, we didn't need it, and B, they've completely screwed it up every step of the way. I've been covering it since about 2010, really heavily. And what's so interesting is in 2012, the price tag, even just 4 years after the ballot initiative was passed, was already over $100 million. And so the legislature was criticizing the High-Speed Rail Authority for this. And so what did they do? They came back about 2 weeks later and said, guess what? We're able to cut it down to $68 billion. But they never said how. I think they just pulled a number out of the air and claimed they were cutting the cost. And then it was after that they started saying, oh, yeah, we're just going to do shortened routes. Oh, we're not going to electrify it, which are all violations of the proposition's mandate.
Exactly. I mean, this is there's so much of this that goes on, especially now that as we've discussed, it feels like a kind of, I mean, we're all working to turn this around. You're a one-party state, basically, no accountability. And that's why it's so important what you're doing, actually. That's why California Globe has been so important, because you're bringing the accountability. And to that end, actually, I want to jump ahead now, because I want to talk about your story that you've just was out there with this story this week. Really important story about, again, holding them accountable for what they say and then looking at what they do. So this is Gavin Newsom during the pandemic. And he was out right in the early days making these big promises about what he would do. This is about masks. I mean, there's so much has happened. And obviously, into the pandemic, the school, all the things that we've discussed and got rightfully angry about, the school closures and all the ridiculous mandates and the kind of shutdowns that hurt small businesses so badly, etc. All of that. This was just one thing, which is right at the beginning, talk about masks. Let's just watch what he was really kind of out there on this with this contract that he had said he procured all these masks. For the state of California. Let's just listen, remind ourselves what he said at the time on national television on Rachel Maddow. This was, let's see, when was it? This was April the 7th, 2020, pretty early on during the pandemic. Let's watch.
The last 48 hours, we have secured through a consortia of nonprofits and a manufacturer here in the state of California, upwards of 200 million masks on a monthly basis that we're confident we can supply the needs of the state of California, potentially the needs of other Western states. And so we just inked a number of contracts in the last few days that give me confidence in being able to say that.
Those masks will be manufactured in California?
No, they'll be manufactured overseas, but we were able to source them through California manufacturer and a consortium of nonprofits. And those are the vast majority of those masks are N95 masks at a price where we're not competing against others. We're not looking at gouging the fraud and the abuse in this space, competing against other states. We decided enough's enough. Let's use the power, the purchasing power of the state of California as a nation state. We did just that. And in the next few weeks, we're going to see supplies at that level into the state of California and potentially the opportunity to export some of those supplies to states in need.
All right, Katy, what happened next?
Well, what was so interesting about what he said there is he neglected to tell you that the first deal his administration made was with a company of two political consultants who hastily formed a brand new business to provide masks to California. And this was inked between some very high officials in his administration who were also political consultants. And yet it was the bank that the treasurer's office was notified who halted the deal and said, wait a second, this $500 billion deal for masks This account was just opened 2 days ago. So that crashed that first deal.
Right.
Then the next deal went to this Chinese manufacturer, which actually doesn't manufacture masks at all, or at least didn't at the time. They manufactured electric buses and just had a division in Southern California. So everybody was getting into the business of mask making.
Yeah. So
he really was not telling us the truth when he said that, we're doing this the right way. We're going through American manufacturers. Not at all.
it's so interesting because he completely wanted to convey. He said, what made in California? He said, California manufacturer. And then Rachel Maddow, to be fair, said, like, will they be made in California? Well, no, and he's just trying to scam people by making out that this is going to be made in California. And then so it's a Chinese company with a plant in Southern California. And what actually happened? I mean, were the masks ever delivered? What happened to the money? Tell us what you've found by digging into this.
Well, that's what was so strange is the plant in Southern California is actually the electric bus manufacturer plant.
Right.
We still really don't know where BYD was manufacturing these. We assume it was in China because if you've seen the photos, particularly members of Congress love to post them on Twitter. Yeah, here's the KN95 mask that Speaker Pelosi handed out, and here's the instructions in Chinese. I don't know how to use it. I mean, they all came from China, and they weren't N95s, they were KN95s.
Right.
Totally different.
Yes.
They failed their safety and security tests with the federal government. So there were a whole bunch of problems with that. There was another very connected to the Newsom administration company that opened up a mask manufacturing plant somewhere in the Bay Area that was also providing masks to the state. Where these masks went, we're not entirely sure. We did find evidence of them being handed out at the Super Bowl, though.
The Super Bowl, where he didn't know it was just before. It was the week before where he didn't wear a mask himself, but he was handing it out.
The playoffs.
Exactly, the playoff.
Yeah.
So how much do we know? How much money, California taxpayer money, went out, and was there value? No, how much did the mask cost? Is there any sort of way of comparing whether he got a good deal here?
We exposed that at the time in our story in April of 2020. Found out through the public records requests that we did with the Treasurer's Office, the Controller's Office, the Office of Emergency Services, et cetera. There were like 7 agencies involved in this, that it looks as though Governor Newsom's great deal costs taxpayers over 4 times what they were actually worth, because only about, I think 2 months later, LA was getting masks from some local distributor for about 80 cents a piece, and he was paying over $4 a piece.
I mean, it's just outrageous, really, isn't it? I mean, talk about something for Lanhee Chen to get stuck into if he manages to get into that state controller's office.
Yes.
I mean, but this is what it's like,
Absolutely.
Because there's just, and they lap it up. I mean, no one follows up. You did. That's why it's so important what you're doing at California Globe. We've got to keep them accountable, and they haven't had enough of that. That's why this goes on and on. Let's move on to sorry, do you have something to add on that?
Oh, no, I was just going to say you're absolutely spot on about Lanhee Chen. He actually, in his interviews, talks about all of the things that need to be addressed by the Controller's Office that is not currently happening, including digging into this mask deal. Where did the masks go? Did they even make it here? And how much do we really spend? And public records requests mostly went unanswered.
Yeah, I mean, no wonder they want to stop him so badly, to trying to make the race all about abortion, because, I mean, if he gets in there and starts exposing some of this stuff, I'm sure there's a lot that they have to be, not just worry about, be frightened of, actually. Let's talk about the crime issue, which never seems to go away. Gascon, there's a bunch of George Gascon stories today. Let's just look at a couple of them. I mean, it's just a shocking story. But again, not surprising, because they just keep coming. So this is about Gascon trying to reduce the headline is Gascon tried to reduce potential sentencing enhancements for a mother accused of murdering her daughter. Did you see this story? Tell us more about it.
This is another one of Gascon's. We can't even call it soft on crime. He's not even addressing the actual crimes that are taking place. And there's just this huge outcry, even with his own assistant district attorneys. Right. But he's turning the other way when murderers like this woman need to actually be prosecuted. It is stunning. Even the Dave Chappelle incident.
Yeah, but let's look at that.
He declined to prosecute that.
Of
guy.
course. I mean, that's another example. I mean, what are you talking about? That was, a guy runs onto the stage with a weapon. I mean, thankfully, wasn't used or didn't hurt. No one was hurt. Dave Chappelle wasn't hurt. But I mean, look, everyone could see what was going on there, and he's choosing to he's just not pressing charge, not pursuing felony charges.
Correct. Yeah, it took the city attorney, who's actually running for mayor, to decide to press some charges. But I think because he's also a soft on crime candidate, he's only pressing misdemeanor charges. This was a full-on assault in front of an entire audience, and now all of the country has seen it on video.
And it's not just
thankfully,
of course, and it's not just the actual fact of it, but when you have something like this that is so visible and so high profile, and a really frightening precedent. I mean, frankly, we can thank Will Smith probably for this, but the idea that comedians now have to fear for their safety when they're just out there telling jokes, which is and doing their living. I mean, it's all Dave Chappelle. There's security there. It's a big venue, Hollywood Bowl, etc. What about all those comedians in the small comedy clubs up and down the state who don't have security, going onto stage, a tiny little stage, there in the room? What must they be thinking? And then when you have the DA in Los Angeles saying, oh, no, we're not even going to prosecute, that's just a green light for more of these attacks.
It certainly is. And I agree with you that it definitely started with the Will Smith incident, which seemed to have emboldened the nutties. And there are plenty of them in this country. But I think at this point, almost anybody that is going to be making a public appearance needs to be concerned about this. When you've got such a high-profile district attorney declining to press any charges, it is stunning to me that he will not press charges in something that is so blatant an assault.
Well, they won't shift off their ideology. You're seeing it with Chesa Boudin near where I am in San Francisco. I live just south of the city, and following that race, that is on the ballot, the recall there, and he's just absolutely refusing to budge. He said, "No, I'm. This is what I was elected to do. I'm going to keep doing it." Same with Gascon. They're not budging off their ideology there, which it clearly is. It's pro-criminal. I mean, there's no other way of describing it. I mean, every time I talk about this, I put the caveat in that actually there is a kernel of validity to the criminal justice reform movement. It was true that there are structural problems in the criminal justice system. Too many people in jail for non-violent crimes. It disproportionately affected black people. That's all true. But they've gone completely in the other direction. This is also the whole basis of that argument of reducing incarceration was like violent criminals should be in jail, non-violent. It was all about the non-violent. We shouldn't be putting people in jail for non. This is violence you're talking about. Murder, in the case in the first story we talked about. This is assault. That's violence. It doesn't even fit their own narrative of why they're doing criminal justice reform.
No. What's so interesting about these two cases, the murder is kind of a mystery to me, the mother who murdered her daughter, because the other ones, Gascon was heavily involved, actually behind Proposition 47 and 57, which essentially decriminalized a lot of crimes or bumped certain felonies down to misdemeanors and misdemeanors down to citations. So what they did, because they couldn't convince people that kind of reform needed to take place, they just redefined what these crimes are. But there's still a lot of very, very violent crimes that are now considered misdemeanors in the state of California, which is really devious.
Yes, it is, and frightening for people. And it's so many people when you talk to them about, what's the really big concern, people who leave, thinking about leaving, wishing they could leave but can't afford to, and so on. It's this crime issue. It's like really, literally frightening in their daily lives. They're worried for their families, their safety. It's really tough. I mean, the one kind of piece of good news here is that we saw this week that the Recall Gascon campaign. We've had the people who lead that campaign on the podcast. We'll have them back. I hope we should do, because the deadline for the signature collection is July the 6th. So it's still a couple of months, and they are saying they've now announced they've got 400,000 signatures. They need 566,857. Probably need a bit more because of the margin. They'll be weeding them out and disqualifying them as much as they can, I guess. But that's pretty encouraging.
It is. It is very encouraging. I think that it tells you that people are paying attention to not just their own neighborhoods now, but what's going on in all of LA. And I think even some of the local news stations are starting to report on this as well. You cannot ignore the levels of crime that are taking place in every city in California right now.
Yeah, and unless we fight back, it's going to change. But actually, it's interesting that it really could happen this year. Chaser Boudin could be recalled in San Francisco. Gascon. When would the election be actually? If the deadline is July the 6th, would that be on the ballot this year in November? Do you know about that?
I believe so.
Right, so it could be both this year.
So.
That could be a really big deal. Then, of course, if you get, I don't know.
Huge.
I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of Rick Caruso in LA, but he's certainly running on a kind of tough on crime relatively. He used to be a Republican. Now he says he's a Democrat. You have to be, I guess, to try and get anywhere in LA.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know. Anyway, look, the point is that that's his message. We got to be tough on crime, more cops, etc.
Yeah.
So there's a real strong pushback up and down the state on this kind of woke DA, Soros-backed pro-criminal ideology that's just caused havoc in California. So we'll see, but it looks encouraging.
Yeah.
If we can get those results, that'll be amazing. Finally, let's just get to this quickly because it's another sort of total dysfunction from these Democrats who sort of lecture everyone about how good they are at governance. This is the gas tax rebate. There's so many things, they come and go. A few weeks ago we were talking about this and gas prices, and then they're all out with these pledges, and Gavin was going to give us all a rebate, and everyone who owns a car, including electric vehicles, were going to get it, and so on. They literally haven't been able to agree on anything. So even though they run everything, and by the way, what a contrast again. Let's just remind ourselves. So when it comes to their virtue signaling or ideology signaling on abortion, like within a day after Monday's leaked draft ruling, they were out, the governor and the Democrat leaders of the state Senate and the Assembly in unison saying with their plan for how they're going to deal with this. They're going to put it on the ballot in November to put the right to an abortion in the state constitution. No problems there. They're all aligned. They had their plan together within 24 hours. Months later, about this gas tax thing, they still can't agree. They're arguing with each other about how it's going to work and what mechanism. Now maybe there'll be something in October, months after people have been kind of stuck with these high gas prices. It's total incompetence.
It really is. It also shows you that they're ignoring the elephant in the room, which would be to relieve the gas tax at the gas pump. So the people actually using the gas get the benefit, and none of them will have that discussion. All they're arguing over who gets what rebate. And it's ridiculous. That rebate is just another stupid stimulus check. Give the gas tax relief at the pump, and everybody will love them for it.
Right, which is what Republicans, Kevin Kiley and others were pushing. They had their bills do that, totally defeated. Yes. It was just so straightforward. But of course, they don't want to do that because then they're worried about the long-term effect of that. They want the money, just like the left generally. They want to take more of their money, control it all, and then hand it out in their bureaucratic schemes that give them the control and them the ability to kind of push their particular ideological agenda, whatever it may be. It is just so symptomatic of the kind of the big government bureaucratic mentality, the technocratic mentality. We saw it all the way through the pandemic, of course, but also their total incompetence. And they just can't get their act together, even on something that they know really hurts them with voters. Even there, they can't figure out a way to do something, even if it's the wrong idea. They can't even get the wrong idea to happen. So I don't know. What a joke. Katy, final thoughts on what we're seeing here today.
Well, I think you summed it up very nicely, Steve. We are seeing such gross incompetence throughout this state government, and they can't get out of their own way, because their agendas are so much more important to them than, obviously, citizen representation, which we don't seem to have in this state anymore, that they will risk losing at the ballot box over something as simple as a gas tax because they need to virtue signal so badly. I think when you see people virtue signaling as much as our politicians do, you know that deep inside they know they're kind of worthless. And so the only thing they can do is seek out opportunities to look virtuous.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And it takes us back to where we started. And that's why they've jumped on this abortion thing, because they don't want to talk about any of this stuff, as we've been discussing. Katy Grimes, great to see you. We'll see a lot more of you. California Globe, make sure you check it out. Really good accountability journalism there. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Thank you.
All right, that was fun. Now, just to sort of wrap up our series of conversations from the California convention down in Anaheim the other week, I really want you to listen to this conversation because I thought it was just so thoughtful and deep, and it's something that we don't talk about often, but it's actually a really important conversation with Charles Moran, who is the head of the Log Cabin Republicans. And we talked about the way that the left have completely tried to sort of colonize the LGBTQ agenda. We talked about all of that, the acronyms and the kind of ideological stuff there, and about what actually, gay and lesbian Republicans think about all of that and where they see their role in the movement to change California. I thought it was a really, really great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Here's Charles Moran. Hello, Rebels. Welcome to the Daily California. Another great conversation for you from our time on the road here at the California GOP State Convention. And I'm joined now by Charles Moran. He is the president of Log Cabin Republicans. Charles, great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I think most people, I certainly knew, I've known about Log Cabin Republicans, big supporter of everything you stand for and what you've been arguing for ever since I knew about it when we moved here 10 years ago from England. For those who don't, just tell everyone what Log Cabin Republicans do and represent and what you're aiming to do with it as an organization.
Sure. Log Cabin Republicans is America's oldest and largest organization of LGBTQ Republicans, conservatives, and our straight allies. We were formed at the behest of then Governor Ronald Reagan when he was governor of the state of California. And is in response to the Briggs Initiative, which was really the first big gay rights movement politically in America, where there was a statewide ballot initiative in California that was going to prohibit open homosexuals from teaching in public schools. Ronald Reagan wanted to oppose that, but he needed a coalition of gay conservatives around him, which he had from his days obviously being governor, but also in Hollywood. And he said, guys and girls, I need you to come out. I need you to get organized and get coordinated because I want to oppose this because it's wrong and it's discriminatory, but I need backup on my side to do it. So I need you to come out of the closet, get organized within the Republican Party. That was the birth of the organization. Flash forward to today, we have over 80 chapters in over 40 states, political action committee, state umbrellas. California, we're very involved here. We've got 11 chapters in the state of California alone. So I'm the president of the national organization. I've been a volunteer for the better part of my life, being a political hack and a fundraiser in California, but have always volunteered in our movement to, really bring our mantra of small government, individual responsibility, and personal freedom to the forefront within the Republican Party. We have a strong home here, obviously because Log Cabin was founded in California. We've had a long relationship with the California Republican Party.
I didn't know that. I really didn't know the origin. And so Reagan instigated, he was the kind of the catalyst for it. But no, actually more than that, he specifically called upon someone to
said it was time. And if you ever saw the movie,
he was governor, was it 68 to 7? When was
it was the end of the 60s, moving into the 70s.
When was Stonewall? That 67.
It was a little bit before, but that was not a quote political action. That was sociological, society taking action.
I'm just wondering whether the Briggs thing was in reaction to that. What was the?
There was around that time. There was just you saw the advent of the modern day social conservative movement start to take action. In the 50s and the 60s, there wasn't a lot of movement around LGBT issues, except for women's lib. That movement in the 60s, so you saw a pushback on that, especially in California. So you saw some of these people trying to push back on that counterculture, and that happened in the mid-60s. So in the late 60s, early 70s is when we saw the Briggs Initiative, which was an attempt to push back on the promiscuity and permissiveness of alternative lifestyles in society. California was a very conservative state.
Very, very interesting. So then I've got so many questions, but let's just start with one that's just coming to mind just as you're speaking. One thing just the acronym, like you've said it now already a couple of times, feels like we all have LGBTQ and then they keep, IA plus, and then there was I saw the other day, other month I think it was, Justin Trudeau put out a tweet where he added 2SL right at the beginning. So the full acronym was 2SL LGBTQIA plus, I think, or just one plus, right? 2SL, for those who aren't keeping up, I think it's two spirit or something.
That's, I think, what it means.
Okay, so like...
And it's a Canadian thing, and that's not...
But like, you just think, it keeps, I know it sounds a kind of silly question, but in a way, there's a depth to it, which is like just reducing it all to an acronym, and and sort of assuming that each group or any individual who finds themselves in one of those groups all have exactly the same interests, whatever. How do you feel about the acronym, which is, I guess, the most commonly used these days is LGBTQ, right? That's what most people say the whole time. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, the LGBT really does encapsulate a vast majority of the population that we talk to and work with. President Trump was the one who actually kind of introduced the Q in one of his speeches. So I was like, okay, I guess we're all using the Q now. So then I went to LGBTQ.
Right.
Q
is for queer.
Queer or questioning. We're not really sure which one it is.
You're questioning.
I'm questioning what the Q is.
Yes.
But one of the, when I start out giving comments, I'll start with an LGBTQ, and then I'll just drop it down to gays and lesbians because it just rolls so much better when we're talking or when I'm giving a speech or whatnot. So gays and lesbians is totally permissible. There are the people who get caught up in what we call the alphabet soup with the letter brigade folks, and these are the people who are continuing to try to add all of these extra letters. But this is part of, who we are as log cabin Republicans, is we're pushing back on this conformity, this militant conformity that the gay left, or what we call gay Inc., continues to try to push to institute a higher level of orthodoxy around, if you are a supporter of gay rights, you have to agree with all of these different issues and include all of these different things. And we just, and that's intersectionality. And that is a part of left-wing.
It's part of Wokism, actually.
It's part of,
in its true sense, in terms of the kind of evolution of an ideology. As I've laid out, if those of you who missed it, I did it about a year or so ago on my Fox News show. You can find it on YouTube, The Origins of Wokism. Goes right back to the 1920s in Germany, in the Frankfurt School of Marxist philosophers. Started out very economic, and eventually ended up here in Columbia Sociology Department in New York. And then it just expanded to include race and gender and all these things.
It's a cult.
And that intersection is Kimberly Crenshaw, isn't it? Intersectionality, the idea that all these different forms of oppression intersect and compound each other.
And we as conservatives, we fundamentally reject that.
It just makes, it's all like the framing of people as victims.
Right. And that's how the left plays off this intersectional Olympics that they play, and it's just one level of oppression versus another level of oppression, and to be oppressed for one is to be oppressed for all, and it's so ridiculous. And that's why we've had such an explosion of growth in our organization, because you've got normal gays and lesbians who are sitting here saying, like, hey, I'm just here because I like dudes. I'm not here for the crazy Green New Deal, for no borders, for abortion on demand, for all of these other, like, socialized medicine. They're not there for that. They're just there for gay rights and, like, just to be treated equally.
And just that sense of, a word I used to make this argument, a long time ago. I was pretty sort of ahead. I'm back in the UK when I was involved in politics there. arguing for marriage equality, as we now call it. It used to be called gay marriage. Marriage equality seems to be the approved term, but that was like years before anyone. He was when it was, and I was even making the argument that civil partnerships actually. I was against civil partnership on the grounds that it sort of puts a sort of separate class. And actually, the word that I used was and I hated the word tolerance. Right? People talk about tolerance. I said, well, hang on a second. That's like it's the sort of thing you say about a bad thing.
Right.
I think acceptance seems to be it's just sort of normality, just like no big deal.
It's really having the same, rights and responsibilities as anybody else does.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I agree. The word tolerance and even, acceptance. I don't need people to accept me. I don't need people to tolerate me.
Right.
I just need to have access to the same rights, roles, and responsibilities.
That's great.
And consequences that everybody else in society does vis-a-vis their,
So do you like the word equality to capture that?
So I'll use the word equality.
Right.
We hate the word equity.
Yes. Well, that means something very different.
Very different, but
Yeah.
the left is starting to move down that road, again, in that train of continued victimization and needing to find new victims who didn't even know that they were victimized, but but if you run out of the victim mentality, then there's no need for their philosophy, the cult of Wokism, to continue.
Right.
So we use the word equality, and today we are very equal in America. LGBT folks in America have at the highest amount of equality that they've ever experienced, and there are some places where it's still not as equal. California is a very progressive state, so I mean we basically have everything here. There are parts of the country that are not.
Yeah.
But in terms of marriage equality, which is really a fundamental part of that, the Supreme Court gave that to us. So when I'm speaking to conservative groups, and last week I was actually in Wichita, Kansas, giving a speech. It was a very different atmosphere than being here in Anaheim in California. I had a very frank conversation with some folks and said, look, I don't need you to accept my relationship. I don't need you to accept my sexual orientation, or as they like to call it, the lifestyle preference. I am who I am, and the law protects me around that. But what we talk about in Log Cabin Republicans, it's the Reagan 80-20 rule. 80% my friend is not 20% my enemy. And we agree in the conservative movement on 80% of issues. So I don't come to these types of conventions looking to focus on the 20%. Some people do. But in our organization, we are looking to find people that we can work together with to build commonalities to get more like-minded Republicans. And I would like, and we advance Republicans who do share that 20% on a lot of these social issues, which is really just equality. We don't even touch some of the other social issues that are out there because we have, half of our organization, I'd say, is pro-life. The other half is pro-choice. There's always an assumption.
That's not your issue. That's
not our issue.
So what's the assumption? It's interesting you were about to say
the assumption is, if you're pro-gay rights, you're pro-choice. And I'm like, well, no, in our organization, we actually have.
Why would someone make that assumption?
Because gay left and the women's lib movement. So the gay rights struggle in America was born out of the women's lib struggle.
Right.
So there's a lot of people who learned how to be gay activists modeled off of the women's lib movement. Right. So they're using a template that inherently has. It's very interesting.
I think of maybe I'm just sort of muddling these up. I think of Stonewall as a kind of really important moment in the gay rights movement. And the women's lib thing, I always put it a little bit later, like early 70s rather than late 60s. Is that not?
Stonewall's was a push back on authoritarian anger and restriction on our lives, but getting politically savvy, that didn't happen until the 70s, and it really was the Briggs Initiative. That was the first coordinated and organized political campaign for the LGBT community to dial into. Harvey Milk was obviously, that was where he got his start. Mind you, he was a Republican small business owner in San Francisco. He had his camera shop in the Castro.
Wait, he wasn't a Republican.
When he first started his political work, he was a Republican. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he
I watched the movie and I didn't.
Well, you really think that in the movie they're going to make highlight of that again? There's bias in the media.
Point. It's the same with Frederick Douglass with Lincoln. They never point out that he was. That's why Rob Smith,
who's a good friend of ours. Yeah,
I love Rob Smith, and he's started the Douglass Society specifically to remind everyone that actually Frederick Douglass was a Republican.
Yes,
Harvey Milk was a Republican.
Yeah, when he first started, it was. Again, small business owner, and had his camera shop in the Castro. So,
I live up in the Bay Area, and we've got the new Harvey Milk terminal at San Francisco Airport. Which beautiful terminal, and they have this big display about all the things he did, and it's great. I love all that, but I don't think I'll find anywhere that he was a Republican.
No,
very interesting.
But it's just again part of the left and what they're doing with this wokeism is they're trying to tear down our social mores in society. It includes rewriting history, and they just try to conveniently exclude the parts of history that don't fit their narrative, and that's one of them. But I mean, him being a Republican is secondary to the fact that that the gay political rights movement started around that time. So the gay community didn't necessarily know how to fashion themselves, how to
Yes.
get organized. So they used that template from the women's lib movement
Yes.
on the ERA and things of that nature.
Yes. Equal Rights Amendment.
Equal Rights Amendment. So that's where there's just this a connotation of, oh, if you're pro-gay rights, you have to be
Very
pro-choice,
interesting.
and that's just not factually
But
the
this
case.
is such
right.
an interesting area because, funnily enough, this is what I was sort of driving at with the seemingly superficial question about the initials and the acronym, is that it is the politicization, and there's also and also this sort of lumping everyone together. There was a very interesting piece that Andrew Sullivan wrote recently about the trans, now the sort of militant trans
Right.
agenda,
Yep.
and how actually, in many ways, that's not, it's directly contradictory to the gay rights movement, in the sense that, like you said earlier, I'm here because I'm gay. I like it.
Yeah.
That's the denial of gender.
Right.
Actually runs counter to that.
Well, and this is one of the interesting things that we're seeing coming out of all of these pieces of legislation in the different states and the conversation about gender. At first, people were like, oh, well, this is just an evolution of the trans rights movement, like, the bathroom bills and whatnot from 6-7 years ago. I think that this is actually quite different. Firstly, as we know, LGB is, other than Let's Go Brandon, is...
that's an acronym we can get behind.
So, lesbian, gay, bisexual, that's sexual orientation.
Yes.
Transgender is gender identity.
Yes.
These are actually fundamentally two different issues. They lump us all together because it's alternative. But, and it's not to say we're going to cut off the T's and we're not going to continue to support them, and we in Log Cabin, and I've made this clear, like, we are not backing away from our commitment for trans people to have equal access to medical care, not get fired from their jobs, to be able to live their life openly and honestly who they are. But what we're seeing now is this isn't just like the bathroom bills debate from 6 or 7 years ago. This is a continued march that we've seen from the left, and I talk about it with the destruction of social mores from Western civilization. They've been trying to take down our history, their critical race theory, re-examine race as a concept for us in society. They've gone after religion in a way of it being oppressive. And now they're going after gender, which is an extraordinarily important component in distinction in Western civilization.
Yes.
So now they're trying to take that down. Choose your pronouns.
Yes.
There's 45 genders, whatever. And it's all of this craziness.
Yes.
And now they're saying, well, you can just, and they're doing it through academia, they're doing it through higher education, lower education, the entertainment industry. Now they've got corporations bought into this type of silliness. But this is just a continued march from the progressive left of trying to tear down these incredible social mores in society, rewrite our history, rewrite race, rewrite religion, rewrite and denigrate gender. So this, I don't see what we're going through now is a continuation of the bathroom bill stuff from 6-7 years ago. This is a continued assault on Western civilization and what makes us who we are and makes freedom what it is to us. So, and what the left is trying to do is sit there and say, look, if you're pro gay rights and you're pro equality, you need to be on board with, K-3 kids, in this education. And that has nothing to do with gay rights whatsoever. These are two different marches, and this is, again, the left, and this is why it's so dangerous, and we have to talk about it, because this is a continued march, and what we're seeing right now with the Florida parental rights bill, and really, this is the only good thing that came out of COVID-19, is parents finally started paying attention to what the social system, public schools, were teaching their kids and indoctrinating them. This is not a gay rights issue.
When you see the way that the left and the Democrats and the media have tried to frame the Florida situation, right? And they've explicitly said this is now an anti-LGBTQ agenda. This is about trying to, going back to the point where you started with the Briggs thing, that I've seen them say this law is all about getting gay and lesbian teachers out of schools, kids whose parents may be gay or lesbian, making that so they can't mention that in school and so on. Are you comfortable getting behind what DeSantis is doing there 100%? Or is there parts of it that make you feel uncomfortable? And what do you think of these criticisms? Where do you come out on that? Are you kind of...
So these are all state level bills. So
Yeah.
what we're seeing in Florida, which is the only bill that's gone through the complete cycle of being introduced, debated, voted on, signed by the governor, introduced into law. There's a lot of other states who have different versions of these laws starting to percolate, and they're not all the same. So I treat Florida and I speak to Florida. I don't do it with
Right.
Tennessee
Fair
or
point.
Ohio
Yeah.
because they're different states with different bills. We did not have a problem with what was going on in the Florida bill because we really looked at it. And I mean, I have gay parents in my organizations who are saying, I don't want the schools teaching my 6-year-old about gender identity
Right.
and sexual orientation. Like, that's not the time, and it's not their role to do that. So
Correct.
this is it.
100%.
I've got gay parents as long with straight parents who are saying this is wrong and this bill needs to be in place because parents are starting to see it.
Yes.
I've gone to, at CPAC this year, there was, the Moms for Liberty group. They bring the coloring books that they're using in 1st and 2nd grade and, with Care Bears with their hands over their private parts and things like, oh, you can be a girl even if you have a penis. And it's like, this
so
is
outrageous.
crazy.
Really, really
and again, parents woke up under
Yeah.
COVID-19 and said, we have got to take back control
Yeah.
of our schools and our kids' education. And I'm like, well, you never should have let it go to start with.
Yes, great point.
But this whole thing is about parental choice. So we in our organization, with the Florida bill specifically, we don't have a problem with the fact, and it's not even to say that the conversation,
Not even not a problem. I mean, it sounds to me like you go
We
further.
do.
This is good. It's important.
It's important. This is healthy for society.
Yes.
The gay parents in my organization want this
Right.
bill to pass. This is not a gay versus straight thing, and this is where
It's so dishonest, by
Yeah.
the way, the framing and the attacks.
the media have
it's so
completely
dishonest.
done a drive-by on this.
Yeah.
We talk about the war of press releases, where Disney would issue, there'd be the issue. Ron DeSantis would give a speech and talk about what Disney's doing and their pushback on him, and then Disney would just issue a press release talking about support of their LGBT cast members
Yes.
and all this other initiatives, and then we're going to give $5 million to the HRC, and they're issuing all this stuff that doesn't actually address the governor, the legislators, or the bill itself.
Yes.
They're just trying to churn this up
Yes.
because it's a fake and a false narrative.
Correct. So let me
crazy.
just ask you, as we sort of come to the end, there's just a couple of questions about kind of where this movement stands politically in both parties. So do you see any, let's just start with the Democrats. So do you get the sense that there are people, gay people, lesbian people who are Democrat, who are also uncomfortable with the militancy that they're seeing? And is that a political opportunity to bring them over to the Republican side? Just as you're seeing, like we were just talking earlier with Byron Donalds, about black parents
Right.
who are seeing what's going on, saying actually this is not what I want, and it could be a helpful bridge politically. Do you see that?
We do, and we've been experiencing it even before this issue. In 2020, I raised some money, and Log Cabin did the first ever LGBT engagement plan on behalf of the RNC and the Trump campaign, where we started talking about these distinctions. When we started saying, like, look, you can support gay rights, but you don't have to believe in the panoply of other intersectional issues that the left will lead you to believe, that if you believe in one, you have to support all.
Yes.
And we gave people a space. We did fact sheets and shareable things and memes and tweets and videos and whatnot. And in that small year where we invested a small amount of money, we doubled the size of Log Cabin's paid membership. We quintupled, this is in 5 months. We quintupled our email sign-up lists. And electorally, according to the New York Times, not our own internals that we did, the gay vote doubled from 2016 to 2020.
Right, for Republicans.
For Republicans and Donald Trump.
I saw that. I remember that. I think I pointed that out on air.
It
actually.
went from 14% to 28%, which probably means it's in the low 30s, just a little
That's
confirmation
interesting,
bias.
isn't it?
So a full third of the gay community is actually voting for Republicans.
That's interesting.
The media is totally not
guess,
gonna-
they'd probably say it was 5%.
Right. Oh yeah.
So what about on the Republican side? So how do Republicans encounter you and your movement? Are you getting a warm reception? Where are you getting pushback? You made the distinction between here in California and Kansas. How's it going? I mean, I do see, I've been, as I mentioned earlier, a strong advocate for marriage equality for many, many years. And sometimes when I say that, I see strong pushback. No, the Bible says this, etc. What kind of reception are you getting from the Republican Party generally?
It's overwhelmingly supportive. In Log Cabin, we don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. We do the work. I'm a delegate to the California Republican Party. I still vote in California. I'm on the Rules Committee. I participate in what goes on. We have gay members in our organization who are candidates, who are party officials, who raise money for the party. So we don't just sit here and expect our little, allowance with our seat at the table that we, quote, deserve. We earn it. Just like every other organization does in this in the California Republican Party. I said that obviously Log Cabin was started in California. In 2014, we actually got officially chartered by the California Republican Party as a recognized volunteer organization because we grew to the breadth and the size that we qualified for that. And just in November, we had our annual Spirit of Lincoln Gala at Mar-a-Lago. We gave an award to, obviously, to Mrs. Trump, but Ronna McDaniel had a video speech. She was at another conference, and she announced the creation of an LGBT coalition at the RNC. It's called the Gay Outreach Committee, which it puts us on parity with all the other different organizations there. So here on the left coast, we have full embrace and recognition from the party. On the right coast, we have, an operation within the Republican National Committee. On the last presidential campaign, Donald Trump created the first ever LGBT coalition on the Trump campaign. It was called Trump Pride. I was a co-chair along with people like Rick Rennell and Bill White and Jill Homan. So we are openly embraced. We have got staff, we've got candidates, we've got party volunteers. And this is the most important thing. Log Cabin is actually a third straight. We have a third of our organization are straight allies. So this isn't, it's just the gays club. It's anybody who believes in equality of opportunity.
And freedom.
And freedom.
And
so we couldn't do our work without our straight allies. So, and again, I'm proud that a third of our organization are straight allies who support our work.
So last question, I'm dying to know, and it's silly, but every time you say it, I think, well, where did that come from? The name, what's the name all about?
So Log Cabin is hearkening back to Abraham Lincoln. As he was working to, create equality for African Americans in America and to free the slaves, to get them a level of equality as we have adopted that in Log Cabin. And there's also the thought that Abraham Lincoln was also gay himself, so which can be debated. But
can it? I don't know.
Yeah, actually it can. Yeah. Okay. So, but his motto and who he was as a leader in this country and in the civil rights movement is something we aspire to in Log Cabin.
Well, I love that because actually, that's how I've always thought of and made the argument in terms of marriage equality is that actually it's a fundamentally conservative, if we as conservatives believe that marriage is a foundational institution of a strong society, then it's like great news that everyone wants to join it. And you should be pro it because you're a conservative.
Yes.
And it's part of strengthening society. And like I always say, well, not always, recently have started to say, the real marriage problem in America is not that gay people are getting married, it's that straight people are not getting married. That's actually the issue. And so, as I say, I believe in marriage equality so much, I even think straight people should get married.
This is good.
If they want to raise a family. So I'm all for this. I think it's great. And what are your kind of next moves? What are you looking forward to in terms of elections and
So we discovered through our work in 2020, obviously I did a lot of work to reach out to disaffected Democrats and independents to say, look, you have an option with Donald Trump. You've got a welcoming Republican Party. And we saw major gains, not just from gays who were voting for us, but actually by suburban college-educated women who were very responsive to our message and basically saying like, look, these things are not, gay equality and the GOP are not at loggerheads with one another. They work congruently. So we discovered that actually we were helping motivate suburban women to come out and vote for GOP candidates.
Interesting.
So, and our research backed that up. So now that we figured that out, we actually think that we're a silver bullet to help. Even though, it's not the presidential election year, we know that the GOP still has a problem with suburban women voters in America. We are going to be part of that panoply of campaign tactics that's going to be reaching to communicate to suburban women. So I'm taking what we did last time and I'm growing it out to start to include suburban women. And I'll look at the data again at the end of this year. And if it still works, then in 2024, we're really going to get big. And we will be not just like, okay, Log Cabin talks to the gays, but Log Cabin is integral to the messaging of the GOP and how we are inviting people to participate in the shared success of America.
I think it's so important.
I love it, and this is what excites me.
There's an alternative there to this kind of strident, militant, far left agenda that is associated with that whole LGBTQ, whatever initials we want to add to it.
Right.
Anyway, great to see you today. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, there we are. That's it. The end of our first week of the Daily California. 5 episodes, one every day. How about that? Tell us what you think. Tell us what you think of this new structure and the kind of guests you'd like to see and the conversations we're having. We really, really want your feedback, as I've been saying all week. We really mean it. I want to hear from you. Follow me at Steve Hilton X. Tell us what you think there. Make sure you follow the podcast at Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Tell your friends. Let's keep growing this movement for change. And we'll see you next week, next Monday, on the Daily California.